Looking for no bullshit conversation about mental health? Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
My name is Matt McDonell, and I live in Wisconsin.
What's up, Matt? What story are you here to share today?
I'm here to share what it's been like to build something deeply personal from the ground up and to carry the weight that comes with it. One of the hardest parts is navigating a rapidly growing alumni list of people I care deeply about and a staff made entirely of alumni who once sat across from me in a broken state. I want to be there for them all the time, but I think of what my first intern leader, a fellow vet, told me. You cannot save everyone, and it's not your job. It will kill you if you try.
That's good advice. Who do you hope hears our conversation today?
I hope leaders, vets, first responders, and anyone really carrying a personal mission hears this. I want them to know that they aren't alone in the loneliness leadership can bring, and that growth and empathy have to be balanced with boundaries. I hope it reminds them that caring about yourself is just as important about caring about the work.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to Learn from People Who Lived It today. I first saw our next guest on TV, actually. I was watching a golf tournament, and they were talking about this incredible organization called Next 18. And I was so struck by it that immediately I reached out to Matt and I said, dude, whatever I can do to champion your cause, I'm here for it. And then it turned out that we had a little bit of a Wisconsin connection, and we spent a little bit of time on the phone, and I'm real glad that our path has led us to where we are today to kind of chop this up and be on this podcast. Now, Matt, as you may or may not know on our podcast, you won't be alone on this journey. Not only will I be here, but I'm about to bring in our third party right now. He is a good friend of mine, and he's on every single podcast that we tape here. His name is Dr. David Lycan. And Dr. Dave is a psychiatrist who has been working with the veteran community for 20 plus years. And so he knows a thing or two about some of the things that are getting ready to be discussed on this episode today. So Dave, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey guys, it's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy you're along for the ride. You're the perfect asset to this one because there's some military service involved in Mathew's story today. So let's start with the very beginning, Mathew. And before we get to Next 18 and what that's all about, you know, here on our pod, we think it's really important to talk about people's childhood and just the first 10 years of their life and what you experienced and who you were and what your parents were like and what the family dynamic was like. Would you mind sharing a little bit of your early days with us?
Yeah, and it's interesting because much of that ties into the program now. As we get into it later, I built what I needed, and I didn't know I needed it when I built it. I grew up in Michigan. My mother and stepfather moved multiple times when I was a child, Michigan to New Jersey and then to Wisconsin, where I'm at now. Both of them were climbing the corporate ladder as most people did in the 80s and 90s. And I thought life was fine. You know, the things that I look back now with a clinical background, functioning alcoholic for a stepfather, an emotionally dependent mother, relying on, codependency, dealing with the stepfather's drinking. When you talk about it, you think, well, I didn't get beat. I had a house to sleep in every night. I had a roof over my head. There was financial means. When I really look at my childhood and going into, teen years, I was pretty unhappy most of my life. And what I really have through the work of Next 18 and listening to others talk and learning, I've really found that I really never felt safe. There was a lot of emotional malnourishment, and I never really got what I needed. So childhood, while it was fine, I think a lot of us, then you go into service, everything's fine. It's great. This is fine. I'm still alive. It's fine. when you look back at it and you look at something like an ACEs assessment, it wasn't as fine as I thought it was.
Will you just take a second and explain to people who don't know what the ACEs score is and how you come to your number?
So ACEs is adverse childhood experiences, and it's 10 questions. I've heard that there's an extrapolation of that where there's like 20 or 30 questions, but my experience is there's 10 questions, and it's on a scale of 1 to 10. And these questions range from I was sexually abused, I was physically beaten, mother or father, someone in the nuclear home was incarcerated or an alcoholic. Most of the things that are not great as a child, right? If you move into that and that's what you're coming from, you're kind of behind the 8 ball. And for me, when I took that assessment a couple of times over the last couple of years, I typically scored a 1 or a 2 on that. And that in and of itself was invalidating because I couldn't figure out what was going on. It doesn't address the emotional malnourishment, the lack of a true father figure, things like that. It's more on the physical side. So I went to a program 2 years ago, and there's 16 men in this room, and it's all vets and first responders. And it's an intensive 3-day program, no phones, no TVs. It's this program. And I learned at that time that the average convicted felon in our country who's incarcerated, I believe, is around a 6 to 7 on this score. And in that camp or that program that I went through, I had like 6 guys in the camp in the group that had 9s. And I'm looking around the room and I'm like, what didn't happen to you? I mean, that's a lot. And then I'm thinking to myself, I probably shouldn't be here. So I'm invalidating myself. And we started incorporating ACEs into our program about 2.5 years ago. And I would say we're averaging around a 3.8 to a 4.2. And the way that I explain this to people is, in layman's terms, it's as if someone tells you when you're born that the sun is pink. All you know is that the sun is pink. And one day when you're 18, someone says, actually, the sun is yellow. It's no different than, the amount that your father drinks, that's an alcoholic. Oh, okay. And it just kind of starts unraveling from there, and you pull the threads and you find out more and more, and you realize, it wasn't as great as I thought it was.
Well, we say this a lot on our podcast, and Dave, you can kind of attest to this. It's like, there's a lot of people that have this type of an upbringing, right? Like, it's not terrible. There's not these awful events that take place. Sometimes there is, but like the famous expression that I have, Mathew, is that nobody's in therapy because they got too many hugs. So, if you have had a mom like I did, it was complete yin and yang. It was war and peace. It was, I love you one moment, and it was beat the shit out of you the next moment, right? It was, if you grow up in that environment, sure, you have some good stuff, but it's the bad stuff that tends to stick with us. I'm wondering about your father's alcohol addiction and how that influenced you.
So he's actually my stepfather, and
okay,
to go
sorry.
one step, you're fine. To go one step further with that, he had been the person that was the father figure in my house from as far back as I can remember. And I found out on my 18th birthday when my mom handed me a bunch of birthday cards that was actually my stepfather. My real father was from Greece, came over here, had a couple children with a couple different women. I found out I wasn't an only child. I had a half brother and a half sister. So the theme of trust, you can kind of see where not feeling safe and not having trust when you're finding these things out. My stepfather, and I preface this with, I've done enough work to understand what he went through as a Polish immigrant in downtown Detroit in like the 70s. I watch his siblings. I haven't talked to him in about 5 years now. I finally separated that relationship. His siblings used to joke that he was the mailman's son. So I can only imagine what that does as trauma to him. He didn't have the skills. He doesn't have the resources, and that's okay. But for me and what I need, that toxicity, I want different in my life. What I saw was it was okay to drink every day. He managed very well off jobs in corporate America all across the country. And what I saw was him coming home and he'd drink a bottle of wine or he'd put a 6-pack of beer down. And then he'd sit at the kitchen table and belittle my mom all night long. So I hurried through my meal to get away from the kitchen table as quickly as possible.
So, Dave, we come to you now, and it's a pretty good opportunity to do so. And you take Mathew's upbringing, and what do you think about as you hear this story? Like, how's that going to set him up, in his life?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that jumps out at me is the idea that normal is what you experience every day growing up, and the environment that you're born into, the things that you experience, you see that every day. That's normal to you until you get out and experience other families and see, oh, okay, it's not the same way everywhere. And then you get a chance to see other patterns of behavior modeled in different families. And then as you get older and more mature, be able to incorporate other patterns into your life and make deliberate choices about how you're reacting to things instead of just following the pattern that you grew up in.
So, Dave, Mathew, I want to come to you now and maybe segue into a little bit of your service because Next 18, this foundation that he has, is truly incredible. He puts on golf camps for first responders, and you can see right there they've had 28 camps that they've done, 300 plus attendees from 37 states. And veteran or active duty, 71%, 29% of them are first responders. And you don't do something like this unless you sort of need it at first or something like that. So how old were you when you entered the military?
Oh man, I gotta go back. I want to say I was like 25 or 26.
Okay.
A little older, yeah.
Yeah, it took 7 years to get an associate's degree, and I figured that wasn't the route I wanted to go anymore. So,
yeah, for sure. What made you interested in the military?
I've actually processed that over the past year and a half, and I used to tell people that I watched the movie Black Hawk Down probably 500 times, and the more I've thought about that, and the more I've looked at my childhood, I'm comfortable saying that I think at a point in my life when I didn't think I had any worth, seeing what Shughart and Gordon did when they went down to rescue the pilots, I knew I had that in me. And I figured if I didn't have any worth, if I was going to die, I wanted to do it in a way that at least had some meaning to it. As much of my childhood really instilled in me that I had no worth. I knew I had the makeup to do it, or at least I thought I could.
Were you right?
I got injured both times going through selection, blew out my knee the first time, suffered a concussion the second time. In between that, there was a deployment. I think my body was a little too old for the wear and tear going through that program. I excelled at everything getting to there. The body just couldn't handle the wear and tear going through the Q course and selection and all of that stuff. And then on the second trip to selection, which was about maybe 4 months after our deployment to Afghanistan, I was still recovering from a knee injury. And at that point, blast exposure, lack of sleep, some other things. And it kind of all came to a culmination after that second attempt. And I said, I don't think my body can handle this. I'm dealing with issues from combat. I'm 28 or 29 at this point. I've been in the military now for 3 years. Probably should figure out what's going on with everything. And before I knew it, I was getting med boarded out from everything that was going on medically.
Can you explain what that means, med boarded out?
Yeah. So my unit was in a pretty combat intensive environment. A lot of us suffered injuries, both physical and mental, blast exposure, teammates getting killed, the wear and tear of carrying 100 plus pounds on patrols every day, dismounted. I started having issues. And when I started going to the doctor, it kind of gets to a point where you can't really show up for your job anymore. I think at the height of it, I had probably 10 appointments a week. And those appointments were at Landstuhl. I was stationed in Grafenwehr at the time. And in Germany, that's about 4 hours apart by Autobahn. So it became a point where it was apparent that it wasn't just one thing going on, but there was like 10 things going on. and my body was falling apart. I wasn't sleeping, and they basically move you to a unit, a warrior transition unit. That was probably the 12 worst months of my life. It was a meat grinder. You were basically a rat at the hospital going through all these tests, kind of testing different meds. And eventually you go back to America. They run you through the process in, I think, North Carolina. And then I found out what my disability rating was, and I was exited from service all within 12 months.
How did that affect you psychologically? Because that must have been really tough.
So I spent 12 months in a unit where there was maybe 8 of us, and we were across 3 different bases, because at that point I had moved to Baumholder, which was an old World War II Soviet or Nazi barrack area, from my understanding, and nothing had been renovated. I think I was the only infantryman there because it was a logistics outpost. So I'm the only beret walking around, and there's all these PC hats and everything. And I had to drive 25 minutes every day to appointments. I've heard oftentimes that leadership that are in positions with that are leaders that have been moved there because they're not good at their jobs. So I'm dealing with people that outrank me, and maybe they're disgruntled about where they're at because they're not doing what they're in the military to do. And I watched men and women go through wanting to kill themselves. It was the quickest way out, and it was a very low point in my life. I don't often give credence to what I went through there. I broke down countless times in the psychiatrist's office because it was literally the worst place I'd ever been in my life. I would rather go back to Afghanistan than go to there.
Yeah, I've heard.
What do you know about it, Dave?
I was going to say, I've heard some pretty terrible stories about people that are kind of stuck processing out, because you go into military service with the intention of, hitting certain goals and being prepared for deployment and serving with your team, that you train together. And it's kind of like when you get stuck in med board, the people that you got along so well with don't look at you the same way anymore, and you feel like a bit of a failure. I mean, even though it's not your fault, those negative feelings are going to still be there, and then sometimes people even pile on and add abuse to it too. I've seen that situation before. You show up at the mess hall and people are giving you a hard time and almost accusing you of not doing your best, or like maybe even deliberately trying to duck service, and it's very hard.
I was just going to say, when you talked to us earlier about, I grew up in a house where I didn't feel very valued, or my self-worth wasn't very great. Mm-hmm. And then you go down this road and it doesn't work out the way you want it. Like, the Black Hawk Down vision doesn't come to fruition. And you don't get to be in your head what you hope that you were going to be. I'm glad Dave asked that question about what did that do to you psychologically, because I had the same question. It's like, how does that pile on? And then, now you're dealing with what I think Dave has called in the past a compound fracture. It's like you already been hit once and now you're hit again and again. I know that in your story, we go to 2019 and you're at one of the lowest points in your life, and you get an email from Semper Fi and America's Fund inviting you to a golf camp in Denver. What's happening leading up to 2019 for that call to be such an impactful moment? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So when I was med boarded, because of the rating I got, a couple of the guys there had been talking about Semper Fi Fund, and this was in like 2014, 2015. And I went through the process of applying to be provided resources by Semper Fi Fund. And their whole thing is you have to be service connected, combat related, and it has to be like over 70 or 80%. And those requirements have gone up since, because there were so many people coming out over the years. So when I moved back to Wisconsin, I was married. That was at the end of 2015. We moved into a house in 2016, very early on. I started a lawn and snow company. I finished my MBA, and I thought everything was fine. I thought I was doing what I needed to do to survive. I got schooling, advanced schooling. I started a business. The business took off. It was doing very well. I had multiple employees, multiple teams. And in I want to say like late 2018, the VA approached me, my clinician in Milwaukee, and he said, we're really making a push to get guys off Ambien or diazepam, because I was on benzodiazepine, my dentist, for post-concussive migraines. And I had been on Ambien with him and the active duty for my sleep issues. What I didn't know is, and I've also, again, substantial work since then, I was closing off, I was isolating, I was singularly focused on work. I pretty much wasn't present for 7 years of my marriage, and I can own that one now. I was so laser focused on getting the mission done. And when the VA approached me, I'd probably been on both of these medications for over 2+ years. I was taking 20 milligrams of each. You start at 5. And the doctor, he said, go talk to the dentist, because he's the one that's got you on the diazepam. Let's figure out how to get you off. The dentist met me in the hallway that day, and he said, I think you can take a half a dose for 2 weeks and stop. And I said, okay. Dr. Dave, I'm sure you know how that went.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Dave. I mean, we've talked about this before, coming off these types of medications and how tough it can be. So help us understand what diazepam is and what it does and why it's such a hard drug to taper off.
Yeah. Diazepam in particular is a medication that I'm not a huge fan of. It does tend to accumulate in fat cells, or at least the metabolite tends to accumulate in fat cells over time. So it's not a clean burning benzodiazepine, but your body does get used to taking it, and there can be some definitely legitimate roles for muscle relaxation, for migraines and things like that. But it's also used for anxiety. It gives you a feeling of well-being when you're taking it. It hits some of the same areas in the brain that alcohol does, right? So if you knock back a shot of vodka or whiskey and you get that calm feeling that comes over you, it's some of the same areas of the brain that benzodiazepines touch. So it can be tricky to get off of it, especially if you have a family history of alcohol addiction. It can be especially tricky to get off of. And even if you taper it very, very slowly over a long period of time, what are you doing to address the underlying cause that got you on the medication in the first place? Right. So a lot of times, and there was definitely a big wave going back, starting maybe 15 years ago, where it was just kind of the stigma to not have people on benzodiazepines. And there was a big push administratively within the VA to get people off of them at all costs, to the point where doctors were being scrutinized, and, how much are you prescribing? How many people do you have on it? Pharmacy would issue reports, and then you get a talking to by your supervisors if you had too many people on medication. So there's that pressure, which then, tends to cloud clinical judgment to some extent, where you're in a position of fighting for something that nobody wants you to do, except for the patient, maybe. So it's a tricky situation. Unfortunately, I've seen colleagues that were more focused on doing what the administration wanted, getting people off the medications, but not focusing enough attention on really transitioning over to something that was effective for the underlying problem. So there was definitely a period of time. It's probably similar now, but they've at this point gotten so many people off the medications that there's less pressure about it.
Are you happy, Mathew, that you're not taking the medicine anymore? Do you feel better without it?
I feel like I have my soul back.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I noticed after, I was just numb.
Yeah.
I was numb. And on top of being someone who disassociated as a child, that just exacerbated that, right? When you're taking a drug that basically knocks you out. And I look back and I wonder how I did what I did. I was getting an MBA. I finished my MBA. I was running a successful business. I was renovating an entire house. And where I lost was I wasn't taking care of my marriage. Yeah.
How was your marriage during that period of time?
So it took 2 years to get off the meds. Literally milligram by milligram every 3 weeks. And then you would titrate, and then you would even out, and then you would go through withdrawals again. And it was just this cycle. And I don't know what I can say on this podcast, but I was not
anything
a great
you want.
person. I was an asshole.
Yeah.
And I think I was an asshole because I was in so much pain.
Of course.
And I remember 2 weeks cold turkey. My wife went to work, and my staff was all outside of my house because I ran the business from the house at that point. And I remember going up into my bedroom and picking up my firearm, because the night before we were making a recipe, and I was reading the instructions, and I thought I was drunk. Like I felt dyslexic, and I had no clue what was going on. And I remember thinking, I don't want to die, but if this is the pain when I come off this is not sustainable. I still to this day don't know why I didn't kill myself. I should be one of the 22 a day or 17.4, or whatever the numbers are being reported now. I should be dead. I should be dead from total organ failure, seizures, any number of side effects of coming off the meds improperly. Yeah, and that happened, and Semper Fi reached out probably in the middle of that downhill, probably maybe 10 to 12 months into the 24 months of coming off. And I don't know what came over me, because I said, yeah, I'm going to go. And I went to this camp. They paid for everything out there. And I met this guy named Ray and Sam, and they were the ones that ran that component of Semper Fi Fund. And it's funny because I actually got to go see both of them yesterday up at Kohler. They're up there running a camp right now. One of my board members is up there, and subsequently 7 alumni are there. And I got to talk to Ray. And I told Ray, like, you're the whole reason I do what I do. And when I wanted to kill myself, you gave me a reason to live.
What clicked for you with that? I'm curious about that.
I think it was the realization of how much I loved the game of golf, because I'd been playing since I was 6 years old, and I didn't play it for the entire time I was in service and when I came home. And I forgot what it was like to be happy.
It
sounds like a pivot
sequence
point
of words? Yeah, like there was something that happened there at that camp where you were like, okay, the light is on again.
Yeah. So it might not have necessarily happened at that camp, because I subsequently went to 3 or 4 others. I went to Aspen to ski. I went to Seattle to learn how to sail. And then I went to another 1 or 2 more golf trips over the next 16 months as I was coming off the back end and getting off the meds and still going through that. And I say this with full love and support for Semper Fi Fund. What I didn't get at the camp is the reason I started an X18. And I've had talks with Semper Fi, and I understand, right? Everybody in every organization has their silos and their lane. Semper Fi was really good at getting me out of isolation. And I think, we all know suicidality, the number one cause is isolation. What I didn't get at those programs was anything in the mental health space. And I'm not talking about what we oftentimes see, which is groups that have fires and they sit around at night and talk and they drink and they smoke. I don't define that as mental health. I define that as camaraderie and connection, where mental health is the work that we do, where we're addressing root causes of trauma. So while I got what I needed in the moment, you still go home and nothing really changes. It's, for some people, I would argue it's worse, because you meet all of these people. And again, I am not knocking Semper Fi. Right. Everybody does what they do. I'm speaking from my experience. And that was other organizations that I went to. There was no call roster. There was no alumni back support. You go to the thing and you come home and nothing changes. You're right back in your setting. And that really sat with me. And it resonated with me from the standpoint of, I felt like I kept going to places and I was being fed fish because everything was paid for. I got cool Burton gear and sailing equipment, and they taught me how to use the fish, but the fishing pole was in the corner, and I wish someone would have taught me how to use the pole. And that's what we do.
Yeah. Well, look, this is a good opportunity to dive into some of what you do. But first, I'm going to ask Dr. Dave to kind of talk about that, right? There's a lot of really, and you've probably seen this over your career, Dr. Dave, right? There's a lot of very well-intentioned people out there. They've set up programs and they've got great programs and they're very helpful for a lot of people. But, you know, look, I've only been in this space about 4 years where I've been talking about mental health almost every day of my life. And what I've come to learn is, and this is from our psychologist friend, Jill, who's a grief counselor. She says a lot of these programs open people up, but they don't close them. And so they're like, hey, there's a bunch of problems and you got some problems, but they don't really give you the tools on how to manage those issues. And so, Dave, I want you to speak on that a little bit. Like, what do people need to be careful about? Because we could all argue that doing anything is helpful. Doing something is going to be helpful. But are there things that you would say, yes, but proceed with caution?
Well, anytime you're trying to make changes, it's a long, difficult road with a lot of starts and stops, right? You start off in a direction, then some things happen, maybe some additional stresses, you retreat a bit back to old patterns, and so you make 3 steps forward and then take 2 steps back. And that's pretty much par for the course. When you go away on a weekend, and I've seen this with retreats and stuff too, you're on like this mountaintop experience emotionally, and you're connecting with other people and things are making sense. And maybe you're making connections with things that you hadn't thought of before. But then when you go back home and all the same problems are waiting for you there, it's quite a drop off from being on that mountaintop experience. And so when you said in some ways it's worse, like that resonated with me.
Yeah. Well, Next 18 has stepped in and you've done an incredible job. I mean, your partnership with the PGA speaks volumes. You probably know this, Mathew, but they don't partner up with just anybody. And so, look, clearly you've latched onto something that is special. And so let's talk about what you do that's a little bit different. What were you not getting at Simplify that you did introduce into your program? And give us a little bit of a flavor about what does a weekend look like for one of your camps, and how long are they? Like, help me understand that.
So our program is 4 days long, 12 participants, and it's run through golf. Going back to my passion and seeing what I saw at Simplify, I figured I could do something through the game of golf. So I went back to school. I got my master's in social work, and that was a pretty clinically intensive internship the first year, working in an IOP program with a bunch of vets and eventually leading my own groups. And while I was there, I met a really awesome clinician in training, Dr. Rachel Goldman. She's since gotten her degree. She's a practicing clinician in the state, psychologist. Rachel educated me about moral injury. Okay, so moral injury was one of the core components that I learned. And subsequently down the road, then I learned about developmental trauma. And at this point, our 4th full year in, our program focuses on developmental trauma, complex PTS and moral injury, and relational sabotage. And what we do over 4 days is each day is a module. And I won't go into it too much, kind of to keep the vagueness of it for when people come, because they have an idea of what it is. And while that's going on, we introduce yoga, breath work, meditation, and journaling. We're really big on body versus brain, somatic work, bottom up as opposed to top down, getting people back in their bodies. Because for me, at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning of this program, I built what I needed. Okay. I have been so disassociated my whole life because that's a coping mechanism. I just built what I needed. And it turns out a lot of people need it. And the way that we do it, this is all done at a golf course, right? So that's where the PGA Tour kind of came in with Birdies for the Brave and bringing us in. We're the only Birdies for the Brave organization out of the 8 or 9 of us that is a golf-centric model. So when the tour asks, how can we help you? Literally every aspect of what they do, from the golf course to the pro shop to the, if we're at a TPC course, every component of what we do can be run through them, no matter how big we get. So the relationship there has been amazing. We come in, it's I call it a 4-day self-care spa. It's a bubble. It's 12 participants. I'm at a point now where I have staff. All of our staff are alumni that have gone through the program and at some point have done the work. And I know that's a catchword, buzzword. These individuals came in, and when they came in, they were not in a great place, right? Different places in their journeys. And they were at a place where they were not taking care of something. And they also maybe didn't have the resources. They've done the work and they come back, and it's a lot of peer-led support. We come in with a clinical background, right? My degree and some of the clinicians, but we don't treat, we don't diagnose. We're not using APA format. I look at it as an elevated non-sterile approach to a sterile industry. Right.
Can we pause for just a second? I just want to pause for a second because you've mentioned a couple of things: developmental trauma and moral injury. And Dave and I actually about 2.5 years ago did almost a 2 or 3 part podcast series on moral injury, because it is one of those things, especially for the military community, that may be one of the biggest things that folks have to deal with. And so, Dave, would you mind giving us your Cliff's Notes on moral injury? And then we'll pick back up and get into what happens at the retreat. But this is such a critical element for so many people.
What I've found over the years is that moral injury is what keeps people stuck, right? So if you experience a trauma and you're having trouble sleeping, we can help you get your sleep regulated. If you're having anxiety going into crowded places, we can help you with anxiety going into crowded places. Do some breathing exercises, some self-awareness and things like that. But the moral injury piece of it, and just for the audience to understand, moral injury is seeing or experiencing something that goes against deeply held personal moral beliefs, right? You witness something terrible happening to somebody else. You are put in a position where you have to make a decision that goes against your moral values, and you do it, and you're stuck with the negative feelings and kind of wondering, like, what does that make me now? And so now that I've seen this, now that I've participated in this, what does that make me? And then trying to reconcile that afterwards. What I find is that instead of fully engaging in treatment, people become shut down. They don't want to talk about things. There's a great amount of shame and guilt that's involved that keeps people stuck. And trying to work through that, there definitely needs to be a portion of forgiveness. And that's, a whole other process to work through. But working through the moral injury part of it, when you don't do that, it keeps people stuck. And I've seen people stuck for decades. They're in treatment, they're getting medications, maybe for depression, but they're just really not progressing or improving. And it's usually the moral injury piece, when you get down to it, when you get somebody to open up and talk about it, that's what's keeping them stuck.
Mathew, I want to ask you, when you're in your retreats with folks and during those 4 days, I'm going to guess that just like me, there is a first time that people have heard about something even called a moral injury. And I'll bet as soon as you articulate that to folks, it lands with them like 1,000 pounds. They go, oh my God, that is what I am dealing with. That is what I am struggling with. So 2-part question here. How many times do you witness that in your program where somebody goes, oh my Lord, for the first time, somebody has seen me and understands what I'm dealing with? And then how are you, or what advice do you give them to deal with the moral injury? So tackle the first part, if you don't mind first, Mathew.
Every single camp.
Really?
Every single camp. And I would argue almost every single person. Almost every single person. And I can only speak for vets. I can't really speak for first responders, but from the conversations I've had with them, it's relatively the same. We're all just kind of told we have PTSD. especially from a DSM diagnosis, right? There's no diagnoses for moral injury yet. We're all just kind of told we have it. And, you know, you look at the statistics, we've had men as old as 76 in our program, and these guys went through Vietnam and some other stuff, and they've been sitting on that. And yeah, well, there's probably PTS episodes there and components. A lot of that I can only imagine is moral injury. Having to kill, having to watch, you know, the innocents getting killed, things like that, going against your long held beliefs, acts of omission, acts of commission. Mm-hmm. And then you come home and it quiets, and it's not my leg is missing or I have a concussion. It's, I think I'm a monster. And how do you sleep with that? How do you sit with that? Right. And the rumination and the doubt and the guilt, that's what eats at you on a daily basis. And that's what inevitably, I believe, puts the gun in most people's mouth. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I hear a lot of the same for the first responders, right? Because what they do, it parallels what we do. You know, real quick, biggest example I give to people to explain what military or law enforcement and EMS and fire go through. Damar Hamlin died on the football field on Thursday Night Football, and everybody in the country watched it a couple of years ago. Those EMS came out, they got him in the ambulance, and they took him. That might have been the 20th call they had that night. That ambulance may have been filled with blood from a previous gunshot. And in the moments when emotion is elicited and feelings happen, when we don't get validated or we don't get the love or support or a simple hug, that's the morally injurious moments, the invalidation of what you're feeling. And for vets and first responders, man, it's bam, 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 like just for years, for decades, for some of us. So yeah, I see it all the time. And your second part of that, I think the biggest thing is, first of all, you're not unique.
Yeah, you're right.
The 11 other people and the men and women standing around you as support, you know, the 15 people here with you, dude, look around. Everybody's reacting the same way right now. It's as if all of you just turned the light switch on. So take a second and take a breath. And I really tried over the first 2 days to educate about it. It's about taking the hat off. You know, what happened to you is a part of you. It is not all of you. It does not define you. And for most of us, we had to do things against our will and against what we believe. That's not your fault.
Right. Getting help can be a real trap for people too. And that can start off even when you're active duty or if you're on the police department or fire department, because as soon as you show signs of weakness, you know, if you see the police psychologist is not there to get you better. The police psychologist is there to make sure that the interests of the police department are taken care of and that you're safe to practice as an officer. So, you know, they have dual agency, and it's not necessarily in your favor. I mean, maybe that might sound harsh to some people, but I think that that's the reality for a lot of people. And I've seen also in special forces in particular, you know, if you're trying to compete for an elite spot and it's already competitive, and let's say you experience something that triggers PTSD or triggers anxiety, you're not about to speak up and blow all those months and months of training that you've put in, right? So the practice of pushing things down and not dealing with things and just kind of sucking it up as best as you can, that becomes ingrained over time, so that when you get out of that environment, you know, you process out of the military, either retire, med board out, you know, your time is up, whatever. That learned process persists, and you need some way to disengage from it. And it sounds like this program is an excellent way to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's clear that it is. And so, you know, this is something that came up when I was dealing with my own mental health battles, which is, you know, because you are, like, to use your word, Mathew, you are an asshole to your family and you're to your kids. And I've said this 100 times on the stage, and so I don't have any issue saying it here, but while you're in that funk, while you're in that rut, you're the worst version of yourself. You're the worst father you can be, the worst brother you can be, the worst husband that you can be. Like, you just don't have the capacity to be useful to anybody, including yourself. And one of the hardest things that I've struggled with is getting people to understand that it's like the monster isn't me; it's the illness that I'm dealing with right now. It's the emotions that I'm trying to manage right now, and it's how it's coming out that's problematic, right? I don't want to be an asshole. I don't want to be not a good dad. I don't want to be not a good person. But it's just so hard because you can't get the brain to shut off, and you can't get yourself like, at least that's my story, right? And so I'm wondering,
or you don't know
if
the
you would.
patterns. You don't know the patterns that lead
Fair.
up to it, so you can't grab the exit ramp before it gets to asshole state.
Childhood, guys.
Yeah, it really does boil down to childhood, doesn't it?
The sun is pink. I didn't get to visualize what a healthy relationship looked like. I still think to this day, my stepfather's never told me he loved me, right? So what do I do with that when an adult relationship tells me they love me? I don't know where to go with that. I've never heard it. And I'm finally in a healthy relationship now. And even that takes a lot of work because the woman that I'm with, right, I've got so much going on now. Things catch up, and it's communicating to her, communicating my feelings, because my entire life, and I believe this is true for many men, right? Your feelings get weaponized against you.
For sure.
If I show vulnerability, if I open up, if I let you in a little bit, it might not come back to bite me now, but maybe 6 months down the road in a conversation it will, or it gets used against me. And it's no different than the cop saying, "Hey, I'm having issues." Well, 2 weeks later, his gun gets pulled and he's on desk duty, right? It's this stigma that we have to be tough and we have to be macho and we can't open up. But we're no different than women in that we all have emotions, and we all operate within the same physiological realm and box of like, trauma is trauma. And if I want to cry, I'm going to cry. And it's okay to cry. And, not getting that my whole life, it stunts you. And then it puts you further behind the 8 ball when you try to have healthy relationships, when you try to expand your network and bring people in, and you don't have people that you've known for a long time and you need to trust. And there's so many components to that. And I see it over and over again at these camps, right? Almost everybody is guarded. They're afraid, they're protective. And you see it, right? You see it on day one when they're sitting in the seats. And the first thing we do at camp is a breath exercise. And we teach Ujjayi breathing. And then we couple that with, let's teach you about a somatic card and emotion wheel, because there's something called primary and secondary emotions. And when you guys get angry, we're not invalidating the anger, but it's probably something else that's triggering that, and you don't even know it. And when you start paying attention to that stuff, that's when you start getting to the root causes of what's affecting you.
Can I ask you if you can recall some of the things that triggered you? What circumstances were very triggering for you, Mathew?
Unseen and invalidated.
Okay.
My whole life as a child being unseen. I was the little figurine that was taken off the shelf when he needed to be thrust out in front of family and civilization. And when I came home, I was put back on the shelf, and no one really validated me. I remember talking to my mom, and this is where I pretty much ended my relationship with my mom about 2 years ago now. I tried to have a conversation with her about a cry for help when I was 17 years old. And I had never talked about this. It kind of got swept under the rug because I was unhappy, like I said. And my parents came to the hospital that night, and no one ever asked me if I needed anything. I never went to see a doctor. They told the neighbors something had happened. And when I brought it up with my mom 20 plus years later, her reaction was, "I don't remember it." And then it was, "We just thought you were drinking a lot." And then it immediately became all of her problems. And I said, in my mind, I'm thinking, it's not about you. You have never listened to me, and you have never validated me. And I'm sitting here right now trying to be open and honest with you about my feelings. And you don't even see me right now. And that, that's what I see a lot of. I see a lot from the men and women from 21 to 76 at my program. most of us are unseen, unheard, or invalidated. And then
Dave,
you go to service. It
yeah,
exacerbates.
I wonder what you're thinking about, Dave, because there's two questions going on in my head. One is, well, how do we help these guys be seen more? How do we validate them more? But then the other part of this is like the people in our lives that are doing this stuff to us.
Right.
And how do we get in front of them in a way where we can say, hey, look, the next time he comes to you, can you please take a major time out and use a different sequence of words or actions? So what do you think about when you hear this?
Well, it goes back to a line that we've said on other podcasts before, is that hurt people, right? So if you're trying to find some common ground with your mom, or trying to understand where she's coming from, there's probably traumas from her background that got her to the point where she's so focused on her own issues and doesn't have the capacity to care about other people in a way that she needs to. Now that doesn't fix the situation, right? But at least it can give you some adult perspective to be able to step back from it a bit and say, okay, that's as good as it's going to get with her. And instead of allowing anger and resentment to build, to try to find a way to release that so that you're able to do differently for other people that are important in your life, right? So that goes into the idea of the transitional character of, I'm the result of generations of trauma, but now I'm going to have it stop with me, and I'm going to choose to live differently and present a different face to my kids and to the people around me, so that cycle doesn't continue.
Can I ask you a question, Dave? You may not be able to answer, and Matt, you can try to tread on this too. But look, here's the truth: a lot of our stuff, right? A lot of our childhood issues are at the result or the hands of our parents and the upbringing that we had, right? And I'm not placed. This is not the blame game. This is not the time or the place for the blame. They did what they did. They did their part. They did the best they could. All those things are there. How does one know when it's time to, like for you, Mathew, maybe this is a question I should just ask you, Mathew, is like, when did you know time to hit the eject button from your stepdad and your mom? Like, and I'm not saying this is going to be a permanent thing in your life, and you may feel similarly, right? But how do we get people to, or when do people know when it's time to, like, I know it's mom, I know it's dad, I know it's my brother, I know it's my sister, I know it's my husband, I know it's my spouse, but they're actually making this situation worse for me. And so, Mathew, I'll ask you to kind of give us your vantage point on when you knew it was time. And then, Dave, if you could think about what you could say to other people to help them understand that, like, maybe the time is now.
So there's a couple parts there. We educate on love languages, and we educate on toxic relationships. And I think for me, going through the program for 2 years, listening to these other clinicians come in as we were building the program out, I really started to pay attention to what they were saying, because what the program started out and where it is now, we added developmental trauma, we added relational sabotage. And, I was in a not great relationship, but it turned out to be the same thing over and over, same woman, different body. And I've heard that a lot of times from the men at my program, and I've heard it from a lot of the women, right? Same man, different body. We go to what's comfortable. Chaos is comfortable for me, so I gravitated to that. So what I started doing is, as I started getting more comfortable and really paying attention to what I needed, I incrementally started setting boundaries in my life as the way I educated to our participants when we're going through the relational component. Write down 5 people that you, after getting this information, believe are toxic. And if one of those is you, put your name down. And if one of those is your partner or your mom, put that down. And then when they're done writing the list, I say, I want you to look at this list. And out of the 5 people on here, if one of them went away tomorrow, you would be okay with it, because you know that this is just not good for you. And I caveat that with, don't make that first person your partner or your parents. You need to start with the Bob who you go to the bar with and get drunk with every week, and you've been doing it since you were 20 and you're 40 now. That shit was cool when you're 20. You're an adult with kids and a job. It's not cool anymore. And when you start to have conversations, if Bob doesn't give you anything but love, Bob's toxic. And that's not Bob's problem, because this is a whole other thing. We really educate about what a true boundary is. It's not about Bob. It's about you more than likely being a people pleaser or a fixer. And it's not your job to get Bob to change. Your job is to set the boundary and then stick to it. And that's something that's really hard for most people to hear, because, we hear toxic relationships and boundaries, and that doesn't mean push everybody out of your life, because sooner or later you're going to have no one under that tent but you. So we really educate these things. And that's what I did. Started with the ones that I didn't necessarily need in my life anymore. And it got to a point where I said, you know what? I think I'm ready to have this conversation with my mom, and I'm okay with it not going the way I want it to go, because I'm comfortable in my own skin having that. And I got exactly what I thought I would get. And just like you've said, I'm not blaming my mom and I'm not blaming my stepfather. I'm at a point, I know what they went through in their childhoods. I'm at a point where the negativity that comes with it, it makes me feel so uncomfortable when I'm around it. I want that, because I want calm in my life now.
All right.
Yeah. What do you want to add to that, Dave?
I think there has to be a transition. So when you're first learning how to dig out from some of the codependent patterns and some of the self-destructive patterns, you need the space to be able to build those muscles and to be able to practice setting boundaries and to have some positive experiences where you're able to feel good about the things that you're doing and feel confident in yourself. And that takes work, and it takes time, and you have to build some positive relationships. So there may need to be a period of time where you severely limit contact with a parent or sibling because they're toxic. But then at some point, once you've built up a bit, you may decide to go back and try to build in a limited way some kind of relationship with them, because now you're coming at it from a position of strength and you have a deeper well of love to draw from for that. But I think it's perfectly fine to take people in measured amounts, and when you know yourself and when you know your limits, say, okay, that's it. I've had enough for now. And you don't have to make a big production about it. You don't have to leave in a huff and make sure that you get a couple digs in on the way out the door. You can just say, okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Well, I've often shared the story, Mathew, on this podcast about I had a psychologist one time explain to me this idea of the custodial relationship. And he basically put it in a way where he said, you think about what a custodian does to a building, right? He's not emotionally charged to take out the trash. He just tends to it. And he does his job, and then he goes home and he goes about his life. And I had a similar experience to you, Mathew, where my relationship with my mom was just really in a tough place. And I actually went through about a 2.5 year span where it was just a custodial relationship. I wasn't rude to her, wasn't mean to her. At Christmas, we would hang out. I would do it in measured doses, and when the trash got too full, I would take it out and I would leave. And that eventually turned into a more meaningful relationship, because thank God my mom did get to a point where she was ready to hear me and ready to listen and ready to work on our relationship. But that won't be everybody's story. Like, there's a small chance that your mom's never ready, which is tragic, because she's missing out on such an opportunity to be so much more closer to you, and to have and ultimately to have the relationship that we all want. Like, there's nobody that wants to hate their mom and their dad, that wants to not be around them, to not hang out with them. And we all long for that relationship to be healthy. It's just tragic that it's not in the cards for everybody. But what he's doing with this next 18 is just spectacular, because you're helping people live independently of their pain.
But the benefit of the custodial relationship too is you're protecting your own self emotionally, but at the same time keeping lines of communication open with your loved ones. Your parent will always be your parent. I mean, they hold a position that you can't get divorced from it. You can't sever it legally. It is what it is, right? And the custodial relationship allows you to maintain some limited line of communication, build trust with them. And maybe over time, if they've done some soul searching, having that line of communication then leaves the door open for potentially a more meaningful relationship.
I hope so. Well, listen, Mathew, what you're doing is so important And I haven't told you this yet in our interview, but when I'm on with other military veterans and I'm having these types of conversations, there's one person that I can't stop thinking about the whole time. And Dave knows where I'm getting ready to go with this, but my brother served in the Army and did 4 tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kuwait. And when he came back from those tours, he was forever changed. And he has spent almost 15 years in a deep bout of pain. And it has started to impact his life physically, mentally, spiritually. About a year ago, we moved him down here to Phoenix, and he's getting much better care right now. He's starting to unravel some of these things. He's starting to look at his addiction. He's starting to look at all of the things that he was using to cope. And he's starting to learn that, like, okay, maybe this isn't a long-term strategy for me. And so part of my motivation to have you on was because there's this little piece of me that thinks maybe this will be the one podcast that Tim listens to, and he hears it, and he listens to you, and he goes, all right, it's possible. There's something out there for me. And so when I tell you that I'm going to put Next 18 in front of my brother, and I'm going to say, hey, you need to look into this, man, and you need to figure out what it looks like. I want you to sign up for it. I want you to get on a waiting list if that's what it takes. But this is exactly what most people need, is what you're doing. It's to a letter. It's what they need.
Thank you. When he signs up, let me know. When he's ready for a seat, we'll have a seat for him.
Cool.
I love that, man. Yeah, that's super cool. Well, Dave, any parting words from you as we wrap up with Mathew today?
It's a process. And
okay.
I think what holds people back a lot of times is they think they know where they want to go, and they make a couple stabs at it, and it doesn't work out immediately, and they get discouraged, and then they withdraw. What I would like to say is encourage people to just stay with it. It's the little steps, little changes consistently done over many, many months going into years. And that's where your growth is going to take place. If you can change one small thing, and certainly going into a program like this is one thing that can kick off the change, but hang in there because the changes take a long time to kick in, and it's the consistency, little things over time that's going to make the big difference.
Yeah, Mathew, what about you? Anything you want to say to the audience, either about your camps or about your experience that you think would be helpful?
I'm going to piggyback what Dr. Dave said. There is no magic pill. There is no magic cure or thing you can do. And I really stress that at our camp. You have to want to change. You have to want to grow and be open to it. I see it time and time again at our camps. And I tell everybody at our camps, and I say this with nothing but love, you can choose to apply what we teach here or don't. And at the end of the day, I can't be there for all of you. You have to go home and do the work. And the biggest thing for us, for the organization, is, we're a nonprofit. We operate from funding. So if this resonates with you, next18.org, it's at the bottom of the screen. This is clearly my purpose and my passion. I hope to get to the point where we're doing 35 to 40 of these a year across the country. We continue to grow with the PGA Tour, and we're taking care of our brothers and sisters across the country and breaking multi-generational traumas and stigmas.
There it is.
Amen.
I love
to that.
it. Yeah, I'm just so into what you're doing. And for those that have been watching on our YouTube channel, he's got a great caddy bib behind him from the John Deere Classic, which is where I saw you just a few weeks ago. And look, dude, I'm excited about what's ahead for you. I love the mission you're on. And I also know, because we talked about this before we jumped on, I also know that starting something like this and doing something like this day in and day out can feel like a very lonely platform. And it's very easy to be sitting in charge of something like this and feel almost a little isolated. But keep pushing through that, because what you're doing for people is not only going to change their life, but the people that come after them as well. And so this this hopefully has a generational impact. So think about that, because that's pretty special.
I really needed to hear that today. Thank you.
Dr. Dave, thank you for your time today.
Pleasure as always.
All right. And we'll see everybody next time on Learn from People Who Lived It. Have a great day.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.